Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of the Atlantic Dialogues. Our first session will begin shortly. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of the Atlantic Dialogues. Our first session will begin shortly. Please take your seats. Please find your translation kits on your seats. Channel 4 is for Spanish, Channel 3 is for French.
Energy consumption is set to keep rising in the coming years, led by developing countries from Asia. Oil demand, in particular, is expected to remain robust as oil products continue to represent the bulk of total final consumption. If the power sector has experienced a successful shift from coal to natural gas and renewables, replacing oil in sectors such as transport and industry will be more difficult and less likely to happen in the short term. Can this seriously hinder the path to decarbonization? Are the renewable and energy efficiency targets at risk of not being reached? Will the actions that countries take today be enough to forestall the direct impacts of climate change, or is it too little too late? How can countries, particularly low-income countries from the Atlantic Basin, effectively carry on with mitigation and adaptation policies to face the consequences of climate change?
Ladies and gentlemen, Please welcome to the stage moderator for the Energy and Climate session, consultant and career broadcast journalist, Uduak Amimo.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up. It's not something we can take for granted. It's a pleasure to see you all again. It's a pleasure to be here as your moderator. Our conversation takes place, as you know, while COP is struggling to arrive at consensus. This was the same story last year, so it's a pleasure to continue the conversation around climate change and how we fix this problem. The struggle, apparently, according to the latest news, is on the architecture of carbon markets, timelines, and funding for poor countries. So our challenge over the next hour or so is to find ways of solving the problem. And in order to do that, we have the finest minds working on this issue, our esteemed panelists. You will see from their bios, you'll check their app, on your app, that they've spent a considerable amount of their careers grappling with these issues. I'll invite them to join me on stage, starting with André Caillé, the Senior Strategic Advisor from Junex in Canada. Mr. Caillé, welcome. Also working on this issue is Andreas Kraemer. He's the founder and chairman of the Ecologic Institute in Germany. I'm quite lucky because I've been paired with these gentlemen a second time, so something obviously worked out right last time. From Africa and the US, we have Thione Niang, who's the co-founder and co-CEO of the Akon Lighting Africa company. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And last but not least, we have Francis Perrin, who's a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, our hosts. Welcome. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll do something. Let's see where we are in terms of our thinking around some of the targets we've set for ourselves around climate change. Please take out your phones and go to the app. Take out your phones, go to the app, and the question, this is a polling question, the question that I'm asking you is, can transport and industrial sectors in the Atlantic Basin get to net zero emissions by 2050? This is a target we've set. Is it possible? And I believe the voting should have started. The countdown should have started. You should have 60 seconds, I believe. Do we know how to get on the app and to do the voting? Okay. Oh, wow. Wow, this is a tough crowd. Okay? So we're having climate change talks every year. And this is the level of pessimism that greets us. So if this is our feeling in the room, how do we expect the people in Spain to achieve any sort of consensus? That's the question that the panelists will be answering. And so I'll start with you, Francis. Please leave this up because we're going to refer to it. I'll start with you, Francis, to give us an overview of global energy demand and how it is that we arrive at this sort of pessimism around decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Yes, we have some significant energy trends which are not always very optimistic. World energy consumption is increasing at a good rate. It's not surprising. And it will go on increasing for several reasons. One of them being, of course, that world population will increase by 2 billion people between now and 2050. as you know, the world energy landscape is dominated by fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas. The share of these fossil fuels is today about 80 to 80%, 85%, sorry, of world energy consumption. World oil consumption is increasing since the beginning of this decade, after, of course, the impact of the world financial and economic crisis at the end of the previous decade. But since 2010, world oil consumption is increasing every year. It will be the case this year and next year. World gas consumption is increasing every year since the beginning of this decade. An important trend is that as far as coal is concerned, at a worldwide level, coal consumption peaked some years ago, around 2013. So there is something significant happening to coal. Renewables consumption is increasing at a very fast rate, about 15% each year, which is, of course, very, very significant. CO2 emissions are increasing, which is not surprising due to these energy trends, of course, at a worldwide level. They are increasing each year between 1 and 2% each year over the latest 10 years. As you know, the landscape is dominated by China, which is the largest emitter of CO2, before the US, before the European Union, before India, Russia, and Japan in this order. So these are some of the most significant trends. As far as perhaps Africa is concerned, obviously its energy consumption is increasing at a good rate. Its oil consumption is increasing. Its gas consumption is increasing. Its hydro consumption is increasing. Its coal consumption is increasing. And its renewables consumption is increasing at perhaps a 20% per year rate. As you know well, in this room, Africa has a huge energy potential. Of course, solar, wind, hydro, but also oil, gas, and coal, even if, as far as coal is concerned, it's concentrated in the south part of the continent. And so we have a huge energy potential. In the coming years, we will have new African countries becoming oil and gas producers. Senegal, in the next few years, will become an oil and gas producer and exporter. Mauritania will become a gas producer and exporter. Uganda will become an oil producer and exporter.
Okay.
Same thing for Kenya.
Yeah. Okay, well, Uganda and Kenya is a bit in doubt. I mean, Tullow hasn't done too well, and that's where a lot of it sits. But the picture you paint is one of disparate energy consumption, with Africa, low energy, countries around, other parts of the Atlantic basin, mid-energy, and then, of course, high energy consumption. What does that mean for us as we discuss decarbonization in terms of geopolitics? Because it seems that's what we're seeing unfolding in Spain at the COP talks.
It means that so far, and of course it may change in the future, but not in the short-term to mid-term future, but rather in the long-term future, the very fast growth of renewables does not mean that fossil fuels are being on the downward trend. So far, we are adding new energies to the present energy mix. The world is consuming more fossil fuels and more renewables. And renewables are not taking market share to fossil fuel, especially to oil. Renewable energies, especially wind and solar, it's to generate power, electricity. And it means that on the power generation sector, you have a fierce competition between coal and gas, which are the dominant energy sources as for now, and renewables, wind and solar energy, which is increasing at a very fast rate, and in some countries, hydro and nuclear. but it does not threaten the key role of oil, because oil is not part of this fierce competition for power generation. Oil is for transport, road transport, marine transport, air transport, and for petrochemicals. Okay. And oil is so far, at least, not at all threatened by this huge rise of renewables at a worldwide level.
Okay, thank you. Andreas, I'll come to you because you've done some work on this. And so speak to us about oil and its longevity, because I've been on groups where there are those who think that oil will cease to be the dominant energy resource in the next 30 years or so. But you make the point that transportation needs around the Atlantic basin will be less dependent on oil going forward.
Yes, that is indeed a good summary of what I am willing to say, and I will say. But before I start with that, I want to say something about the survey that we did. You started the whole session with a short video. That short video was very optimistic for oil. And you didn't see a wind turbine in it, you didn't see a solar panel in it, you didn't see a hydropower dam in it. It was to prime the whole audience to believe that the future is oil. Now behind us, we had just previously the solar panel, and I challenge the organizers, next year when we meet for the energy discussion, let's have a video that shows a concentrated solar power plant in Morocco, that shows wind turbines that are turning and spinning, that shows the water shooting through a hydropower dam, and that shows small solar panels on African homes with smart energy systems that for the family cost $300 to $500. The investment for those is so small that the national statistics don't actually see that as an investment. Even in the aggregate, they don't see it as an investment. They think this is consumption. But this is investment in Africa's future. If you'd shown a different video, I think that the bars on the survey would have been exactly the opposite.
We stand guided, and we thank you for that. Yes.
We'll test that next year. I look forward to that. But yes, much too optimistic for oil and much too pessimistic for renewables, and we do have a rapid transformation in the transport sector. I had a discussion with a representative of a dealership, a large dealership of Mercedes-Benz last week, and they told me that they had been told by Mercedes-Benz to prepare everybody in their dealership, everybody who does repairs in their workshop, to sell 100% electric cars by 2030. Basically, they're saying in 10 years' time, you're not going to sell any internal combustion engine cars anymore. With the average lifespan of a normal car in Germany, we know that by 2040, statistically, the whole car fleet in Germany will be driven by renewable energy, renewable electricity in electric cars. Now, obviously, that's not true. There will be car enthusiasts that will keep their old diesel car running. It's a hobby, but it's not going to be economically important. 20 years and oil will be out of the road transport in Germany. We have the same trend now in marine shipping, where different technologies are used in order first to reduce the oil consumption by the world shipping fleet. It's slower because a ship remains on the ocean for 40 to 60 years, depending on what it is. So the rate of changeover is much slower. It will take some more time. We have the first commercial electric flight now in Canada. So even in flight transport and air transport, we're going to see new fuels coming in. And when the industry says it's going to take 10 years for the new cars to shift over to electric and 20 years for the whole fleet to change over, in the past, they've always got it wrong. They always estimated that it would take much longer. So my response to the original survey would have been, yes, we can be net zero by 2050, but why would we want to take so long over it? We can do it much faster.
Excellent, thank you. And yet, we see this fragmentation around the Atlantic basin. The examples you've given us are Atlantic basin countries which are wealthier, and yet when you look at emerging economies, emerging markets, the transport industries there are still way behind. And so the problem becomes, how do they grow their transport and industrial sectors using new technology that is climate friendly when there is no financing for it?
For a start, one of the most promising areas that is traditional fuel in the transport sector is the bioethanol that is used for a large part of powering the car fleet in Brazil. And it's a technology that is washing across the Atlantic. It's been replicated in parts of Africa where the conditions for growing sugarcane are amenable for that. Let's not forget that there are other alternatives. At the moment, it doesn't make sense to use surplus renewable electricity and convert it into gas first and then liquid fuels. But the economic crossover will happen sometime around 2023 to 2028. It will be different in different geographies. As of that time, we will have sufficient renewable electricity installed everywhere so that we have surplus electricity being generated, which we can then use to convert into liquid fuels. We are going to be able to use liquid fuels in shipping, in air traffic, but also in the persistent car fleets that we have. Africa is going to, that's my prediction, is going to suffer from the consequences of the rapid shift in the north. Because what happens when the Germans all buy new electric cars? Their old diesel and gas cars, the internal combustion cars, they're going to go onto ships and they're going to be shipped to Africa, where you will keep driving them for about 20 years. It's going to create a perverse path dependency in Africa to supply those cars with liquid fuels for 2 or 3 decades before you will retire them as well, in order to then upgrade to the electric drivetrains that will then become much cheaper anyway. And let's not forget, making an electric car today, they are expensive on the market, but actually making it is about half the price of an equivalent internal combustion engine car. To run it is about 1/3 of the price, today. If you want to buy a Tesla Model S, that's the big one, the expensive one, its total cost of ownership over its lifetime is already lower today than it is of buying a similar-sized Mercedes, BMW, Audi, or whatever else I can recommend as a German engineer.
Thank you, Andreas. André, I'll come to you because when we talk about energy and the demand, we talk about industrial sectors. Transport features quite high on that agenda. But of course, we know that our industrial needs are quite spread out. And so what would you say in terms of how the countries around the Atlantic basin prioritize their energy needs going forward?
Yeah, but first of all, if you allow me, I'd like to react to the what was the information.
The poll.
Yeah, I think I'd like to submit that and respectfully that this is too pessimistic, because I think the electric car will improve both in cost and efficiency. And therefore that you will see much more of those car combustion engine be replaced by electrical cars. So it's got the figures, the end result is going to be better than what was
so
seen.
Let me just interrupt you then.
Yeah.
Would you then say on this panel that we don't know enough, and that was reflected in the pessimism we saw? That there's a gap between, say, the information that you, as specialists in this area, have, and we, as perhaps a lay audience?
I can understand the remark or the polls because it's rather new. It's new technology. I mean, the oil burning engine in transportation has been known for years now. And it was a real success when it was introduced, but now we're getting to the transformation. It's now the beginning of the transformation because electrical car technology has improved a lot. And I think we will see penetration, in the market penetration, that will make those numbers look pessimistic in the future. Well, that's my point of view. I'd like to remind also that the number one issue when it comes to limiting the increase of temperature of our atmosphere is not so much about, it's in transportation, of course, but much more in coal producing power, exactly. Yeah, I agree completely with IEA's position, is that if we are to get close to the 2 degrees increase, we need to stop building power generators using coal, number one, and secondly, we have to transform those we have progressively for the use of natural gas. If this isn't done, and this is very specific, if this isn't done, I think we will see temperature increase much more important than 2 degrees. Having said that whatever the result, I think if you're talking about the Atlantic basin, we need to invest much more in adaptation measures because I think it's going to be at least 2 degrees, and if looking at actual numbers, unfortunately, it's going to be significantly above 2 degrees, and countries, the poorest in the Atlantic basin, which happen to be on the Southern Hemisphere, either in South America or sub-Sahara regions, they will need adaptation measure to be developed at a much faster rate than what's been seen now. And in adaptation measure, what I see for myself, I see that renewables should be developed, both wind and solar, to supply mini grids. And that would help people in this, let's say, from sub-Saharan regions to adapt, because they are mainly in agriculture, and agriculture will need irrigation, more irrigation, and you will also need more refrigeration to keep the products you will be producing. So this is an area of cooperation between Northern Atlantic and Southern Atlantic.
Okay. I'll come back to you later on what that cooperation would look like. But Thione, this is a perfect segue for you, because Akon Lighting Africa, you got on with it. You know. So tell us about that experience of getting on with it, in spite of the wrangling, the geopolitical wrangling we see about who pays for what.
Well, thank you. Akon Lighting Africa was a response to what we saw, all of us saw as a problem in Africa. I'm originally from Senegal. Akon is from Senegal originally also. And Samba Bachili is from Mali. So when Akon and I met a few years ago in Washington, we talked about what could we do together to help bring our forces in some of the most pressing issues that we have in Africa. You know, as a young man growing in Senegal, in Kaolack, I didn't have electricity with my family. My grandfather used to wake me up to go study my lessons early in the morning. So this issue of energy is personal to me. So I've never forgotten when I went to the US that there is something needs to be done. There's millions of other children like me who until today, if we don't do anything, will not have no access to electricity whatsoever. Some of you in this room today, this morning, if you go home and the electricity in your house is taken off, you're going to be calling somebody and fussing at somebody. But the news to you is 600 million people in my continent are living in these conditions every single day. When a woman is having a baby in the middle of the night, outside of those villages in Kenya or in Senegal or in Cotonou in Nigeria, there is no poste de santé to go to, there is no hospital to go to. I've seen it in my own eyes and it changed my life. In those schools that we have until today, millions of schools where the future of our continent are being trained at, are in those schools with no electricity whatsoever. So somebody had to do something. We decided that the first project we're going to work on is on energy, because it's at the core and the heartbeat of development and anything that we need to change in the continent. But we had to figure out which way in energy. The good news is that, you know, where we failed in Europe or in the United States, we can leapfrog now in Africa, because many of our countries are new countries. You can see the mistakes in the other side and try to recreate some new avenues where you can be mindful of the environment at the same time. If you look at the telecom business, for example, in Africa, many of our homes never had a chance to have home telephone. Yeah. We skipped that part. We went from leapfrogging from directly to cell phones now. My house, we didn't have home telephone, but now everybody in my community has a cell phone. The idea was, how can we be mindful of the energy of the environment and come up with a solution that supports the community, where the young child can study at night and the hospitals can have that, and the farmers like myself can use energy with the sun that we have to be productive. So we came up with the Akon Lighting Africa. We gathered partners around the world, in China, in the US, here in Europe and Africa, and etc., with the governments. And today we are in 18 countries, one of the leading solar energy companies in the continent. More than 5,400 young people are working every single day to help us reach our goals in those 18 countries. That is the story of the Akon Lighting Africa.
It's a powerful story. So when you see the sort of poll results that we had, the pessimism about net zero emissions, when you hear from Spain that we're, you know, bogged down in talks about, you know, the carbon architecture, who's paying for what, poor countries need financing, the wealthier countries won't. And here you are with this story of people, what do we do? How do we do it? Who's on board with us? What would you say to the people at COP?
Well, what I would say is that I'll tell them to keep talking, keep trying to figure out the issues that they created themselves. And when they finish talking, they can meet us in the road to try to solve the problems for our people. Because where we are now in Africa, we are in what President Obama calls the fierce urgency of now. I've seen it, man. I'm telling you that I can see my people have no access to energy whatsoever. And I want the same thing that I see in the young people in Harvard University to the young people in Africa. I want these young people to be tomorrow the leading forces of our economies. I want our economy to be controlled by the nationals, Africans themselves. I want the discussions of energy to be centralized by young Africans themselves. Because that's what I've seen in Singapore. I've not seen in Singapore young people from Europe or from the United States coming to tell them how to run their energy sector. I've not seen it here in this great country in Morocco. They figure out a way to do it in less than 20 years. In Europe, in your countries, in Canada, and etc. But what I'm tired of, and I want to see change, is Europe and the United States and other countries try to show us how to develop our countries. Because somehow it didn't work in Europe. Because in the end, they're hurting the environment. And today we cannot tell us, well, Africa, you cannot, we have to be careful about the environment. We need to develop our countries. We need mixed energy in Africa. If those things you think you don't need anymore, bring it to us until we develop our countries. We need industries. We need to build factories. Okay, how are we going to do it? The same way you did it. If it means that we have to also do solar and do fossil, do gas, do all kinds of mixed energies, we got to do it first. Then the regular Joe or the Ramadu Mamadou and Fatu in the villages will be able to have a decent job, to be dignified for his life, so they don't have to suffer. Millions of Africans today, $1 a day they can have access to. This is why you see millions of our young people taking those boats to come to Europe following a dream that doesn't exist anymore. I want to solve those problems. I want that to be done. And if it means to get mixed energy, if it means to pollute, well, I'm sorry for those environmentalists, but we have to develop our continent. This is my answer to those who are talking. And when they finish talking, they can come and support what we're doing. But in the meantime, we have to find solutions. For the Ecologic Africa, for example, what we did is we came up with 3 parts of it. The first was to make sure that we have the street light systems so that can give security to those communities, to those villages. Between Maradi and Nigeria, the border of Niger and Nigeria, for example, the small town named Maradi, very heavy traffic. We went and electrified all those villages with the mayor. Now women at night can sell their goods, their fruits, and etc. longer, till 12 o'clock or what a night. Before, they told us 7 p.m. before the sun comes down, we're gone. They make extra money to send their children to school, to send somebody to the hospital to take care of feed their families. That is primordial for us. The second piece was to make sure we have a home system that the far villages that don't have too much money can have access to. You talked about that. And the third and last one was the mini-grid systems that connects the hostels, the mosques, the schools, and etc. And then these are the 3 parts that we're working on. But to make it work, we had a problem because many of our young people are not trained in Africa. So we created the Solar Academy in Mali and in Senegal to do the transfer of knowledge to make sure each of these young people have access to the knowledge that we need. And they are today helping us, 5,400 of them, to install the project all around the continent.
Okay, Thione, thank you very much. It's a powerful story, and you introduced several things. You link this conversation to migration, which continues to be a problem for us, but you also talk about energy inequality. You talk about energy poverty that much of Africa is living in. And so, Andres, I'll come to you before I go to the audience for a word cloud. Which is to, and Thione talked about this, if Morocco is able to sort out their energy problems, why is it that the rest of the continent or various others are struggling? Does this have to do with technical capacity? Is this lack of foresight, poor political commitment? What are we dealing with?
Well, I don't think it's fair to talk about Africa as a whole as if it were one place. There is a huge difference between the green renewable energy superpower that Morocco has become compared to Nigeria with its oil, South Africa with its coal, Algeria with its gas. Africa has so many starting points. Some regions are energy rich, some regions are energy poor, and you described examples of that. So I think it's unfair to talk about Africa as a whole. But as sort of little bit of spotlights, you do have in South Africa immense corruption that breeds path dependency on coal that you don't have in other African countries. You do have in certain parts of Africa, Angola and Nigeria, just as examples, that have old and established oil and gas industries, mostly oil, and they drive a lot of the political power in the country. Whoever controls the energy resources can also control the political process. It's called the resource curse. Google resource curse and you find a lot of academic literature and case studies about the negative effect of natural resources being exploited, being appropriated by an elite that then suppresses change and suppresses democratic self-government by the population. Resources, specifically of fossil resources and mineral resources, they do breed autocracy. And that doesn't make it easier to then educate the young so that they can develop their own ideas, become involved in the decision-making in the society and in the state, and then develop the new technologies. There is a lot of path dependency built into the system by the fact that whoever controls the energy system also controls the political power system. I think that's the summary I can give with all respect to the huge variegation that you have within Africa.
Okay, so yes.
I'd like to add this simple thing in reaction to what you said. It is for Africans to decide.
That is.
Let's be very clear about that. But as an observer, I see electrification of rural Africa as a real, should be a real priority. But again, it's for Africans to decide. And there's a lot of potential to do that right now because renewable technologies will produce electricity at a lower cost than actual costs. It's probably this only region in the world, maybe we should ask South America, where you can produce electric power with renewables at the least at a cost that is less than the existing cost. So if what I can only suggest, because it's for Africans to decide, I think electrification of rural Africa and of rural South America is a necessary adaptation measure, considering that climate temperature is going to reach somewhere above 2 degrees. But I can understand the need for development. And when I'm talking about rural Africa, I'm talking about mini-grids. And we should also talk, of course, of grid expansion from the shore that could change the life of many people, maybe just as many people. But again, the point I wanted to make, Madame, is it is for Africans to decide, and I think this is the starting point for change that would be much more rapid.
Well, thank you for acknowledging that.
Yes, I was coming to you, Francis, because you were quite optimistic about the future of fossil fuels, oil. And so given what we've been hearing from your fellow panelists, it does seem to me as if we're missing the environmental piece in this conversation. But given what you've heard, would you still center oil as it not, the demand for oil not declining anytime soon?
We are speaking about optimism and about pessimism. And we must also speak about realism, which is another stage which is very important when you consider energy and climate issues. So oil now is the most important energy source. It's a fact. It's not because you like oil or don't like oil. It's the energy which is the most consumed in the world, with a market share of about 34% of the world energy consumption. Obviously, we speak about the energy sector with huge investment needs. We must finance these huge investments. You have equipment with a long duration of life. So changes in the energy sector do not happen in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Very significant changes. So oil will remain very important until the mid of this century, due to its share in transport, and not only cars, but transport and petrochemicals. And of course, we will see other energy sources gaining ground, gaining some market share. And as has been said by previous speakers, we must never forget that energy is, of course, linked to climate issues. It's the title of our session, of our plenary. But energy is also linked to economic growth, economic development, as my neighbor stressed this point. In Africa, as of today, we have about 600 million people without access to electricity, and about 900 million people without access to clean cooking. So it's also part of the energy landscape. We must focus, of course, on climate issue because it's a global problem, but not forget the fact that an energy policy is not only an environmental policy. You have two other main dimensions: energy access and economic competitiveness.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll come to the audience. Please take out your phones, because I'd like you to tell us what you think the priority should be. You heard Thione talking about the fact that we need to grow, we need to develop, and there's this sense that we're being forced to develop and not, we're not given the space to make the mistakes that the developed world made. And so the question is, what should countries in the global south, the Atlantic basin, prioritize as they seek to decarbonize? Yeah? And I believe the countdown has started. What should we be focusing on as we seek to decarbonize? Andreas, you don't seem happy.
No.
Okay, so what's going on? What are you thinking? Why are you unhappy?
The largest black one is nuclear, which doesn't make economic sense. It never has done. It doesn't do, and it can only be explained by either corruption or by unstated military intent. And I do not see wind power or solar power or biomass being at the same scale. So there must be nuclear lobbyists in the room that have to explain that result.
Well, we do have renewables.
Yes, we do.
And there is sustainability and there is green. So, you know, maybe... Thione, what are you thinking when you see these results?
Well, I see it comes back to what I talked about earlier, is development again, and it's at the core of everything. And I'm a farmer. As a farmer, we need energy every single day.
Sorry, please put it back up. Yes,
we need energy every day to be able to perform. Mm-hmm. Before I get into farming, when I first got into farming, it was very expensive, for example, for me, every month to pay electricity. Somehow in our policies in Senegal, it's almost double the amount of energy that we're paying as a farmer compared.
What do you grow and how do you consume energy?
I grow crops, vegetables, we do chicken and eggs, we do cattle. I do a little bit of everything the farmers do. And we have a agricultural institute in the farm to train young people into farming. Basically, the idea was the same thing that got me into Akon Lighting Africa, got me into farming. When I came home in Senegal, and I see that most of the food that we eat in our Chebujan, in our jollof, the real jollof rice.
No, sorry.
Now we're going to start a war with the Nigerians. So I see the majority of that is coming from overseas. The rice from Malaysia and etc., Ukraine, the oil, most of the vegetables here in Morocco. I said there's something to be done because we have the youngest population in the world. We have flat land, 365 days of sun. It doesn't make any sense. We should be feeding the world, not the other way around. So I went and invested into agriculture. But the problem that I had in the beginning, the past 4 years, is to figure out how to reduce the cost of energy, because everything we were making at the end of crops, we spend it back in electricity. So when we had the Akon Lighting Africa, I was able to put things together to put it all into solar energy. Again, 365 days of sun a year. The whole year we have solar. We have the sun. Now it puts me in a position where I can sell my crops and still make profits without worrying about the high bills of electricity.
All right. Francis, please respond to the... Sorry, could you please put the word cloud back up? Please respond to what you saw.
We have some important words. Development, sustainability, which are very big, so it's important. And to go back to the nuclear issue, it's perfectly right that nuclear is not very important at a worldwide level. Nuclear energy is important for some countries, China, France, the US, etc. But at a worldwide level, nuclear energy today, it's about between 4 and 5% of world energy consumption, as against 80 to 85 for fossil fuels. So clearly, nuclear energy is not very important in the energy landscape of today, and very probably tomorrow and the day after.
Okay, André.
This time I agree. I think development is #1 issue, as it's been said already, and to grow the energy sector is also a very important issue. And sustainability is the issue, and I see behind the word the development of renewable, because wind power and solar power in Africa are cheaper, will reduce the cost compared to today. The cost of power. So I agree with all this, including agriculture should be one of the support to agriculture should be one of the priority. As for nuclear, I agree with my colleagues. It's I don't think it's really an issue or something that is rich in bringing opportunities to Africa or South America for that matter.
Right.
But I'd like to remind the people that if you are to increase energy power production in Africa using power that comes from coal, of course, we're getting nowhere. That would be against sustainability. And unfortunately, in the world today, we see a lot of additional power being produced using coal, where today we should be aiming the opposite, to produce power, yes, but not using coal.
So if countries around the Atlantic basin were prioritizing cooperation, were prioritizing development, agriculture, sustainability, what should we be seeing? Very quickly before I go to the audience. Sorry, I'll ask Francis, go ahead.
Inequality.
Perhaps there is one thing missing in the equation, energy efficiency.
Okay.
In energy policies, we are speaking a lot about renewables, which is important, but we are not speaking at all, not only today in this session, about energy efficiency.
Why do you think
as far as I
is?
am concerned, I think that energy efficiency should be the #1 priority of every country in the world, whether producing or consuming countries.
Okay.
And after renewables.
Okay. Thione, what would it look like from where you sit if we were cooperating around the Atlantic basin, focusing on agriculture, sustainability, development? What would
it will come back to me. What moves me is to be able to close the gap of inequalities. What moves me is how we make sure that the least of us, we can bring them back up to where we are. So we can balance society a bit. You know, I still cannot understand that our continent have 30% of the world's natural resources. My country today, Senegal, found so much gas and oil. Nigeria is one of the 6th in the world. But until today, we're still trying to figure out how to turn the lights on to majority of in our homes.
Yeah.
And this comes to a problem that I see is the problem of leadership. And how we can solve that issue of leadership, if we solve it, it will close the gap. It will take a new generation of young Africans who's traveled the world, who understand how nation building works, who have no complexity whatsoever to how to address the issues that we face, and to take ownership of that. What needs to change will come from us with our partners who will come to the continent in a win-win situation.
Thank you.
And this is what moves me. This is the core of what I'm talking about. Everything else is the core, the policies, and all those things is just good.
But the point you're saying is that we would see
close
strong
the gap,
leadership.
the inequality.
Andreas, what would we be saying?
I think that cooperation requires understanding and respect, and you've spoken to that already. I don't need to elaborate on that. But I also think that we need to consider two things. One is the future. Where do we want to go? And we need to be honest about the economics. You already said that today, building up new systems with renewable energy and smart energy systems, including storage, is cheaper than expanding and maintaining the existing fossil infrastructure. And that is true in the electricity supply, and it will be true very soon also for the transport sector. You all carry the vision in your pocket. You don't realize this, but if you take the 100 dirham banknote of Morocco, what you have on there is a sustainable renewable energy transport system. That's the camel, and the challenge is to find one that is more appropriate for today's mobility needs. And the other one is something that people overlook, is there actually wind turbines in the desert on the banknote. This is a statement about the present and the future energy system of Africa. And that is
The animal protection rights will come after you on the camel thing.
they might do that. But behind that is we need to think about the money, the economics, and we need to think about the co-transformation of our energy system and our transport system. When we combine those, that is when we make progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andre, what would it look like?
Again, it's for Africans to decide, but we in Canada, for instance, back in the 1950s, I was born on a farm where there were no electricity, no switch to turn on. Okay, and 15 years later, there were electricity everywhere.
Only 15
including the farms. But what we had is an electrification program run by the state-owned company, because the little private producers could not make it. And we've stayed maybe a couple of decades without electricity because of that. And it only became to be realized full access to electricity when a state-owned company took charge of a program called Electrification Program. And they got on with it, and they realized it. So we can show us maybe as an example, but again,
guess what?
for Africans to decide whichever way they want to do it.
Great story, 15 years it took you. But guess what? In my country, for example, since independence in the 1960s, our electricity is run by the state. We still don't have electricity.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So it's not exactly the answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know.
So look, I'm going to open up the floor. Ooh, okay. So the middle was quick off the bat. So we will start here, and then we will work our way outwards, all right? And so please be as brief as possible. We'll harvest as many questions as we can. There should be some microphones. Yes, excuse me. And so we see here Marcus, Dr. Han, I believe. If we just take the questions from here, and then we'll come out to the other side. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, Marcus Freitas from Brazil. I always enjoy these discussions, but I think we do not really see that we need to change a few things on the way we live, on the way we plan our cities, or even on what we eat. Nobody mentioned that methane is 16% of CO2 emissions, right? And the meat that we eat is part of it. So we keep talking about electric cars and all that, but we never think about deeper that we need to change the way things are done, which is not going to happen if you're only thinking about electric cars and still keeping the same model that really will not effectively deliver a better future. But my question to you is this: which country is contributing the most to changes when it comes to CO2 reductions? I'm not talking about numbers, but effectively the technology. Right? I remember the solar panels in the past were very expensive. Now all of a sudden solar panels are very cheap.
Yeah.
So which country is contributing the most in this sense? And second, what are the things that have been done so that technology is cheaper, or royalties are not charged? What are the things that we're doing to effectively share this knowledge if we truly have an interest in reducing CO2 emissions?
Okay, thank you. Please pass the microphone to Obi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When you look at what happened with the telecommunications sector on our continent, it tells a story of your frustration. What happened with telecommunication was that for several decades, leaders on the continent decided that there was some national interest that needed to be preserved, and therefore they basically entrenched complete state control of the telecom sector, and that meant an exclusion of the generality of population from access to the basic services of telephone. Then came the dawn of a new era when leaders understood that deregulation and liberalization of that sector and making sure that the right policies and institutional frameworks were put in place could enable a different outcome. Once that happened, Africa leaped from 20 million telephone lines to almost, we're climbing all the way every year. It's more than 500 million already in terms of, what do you call that thing? Cell phones. It's the same story with energy that we need to begin to think about, even though it's not entirely the same kind of market. Because with energy, you've got the whole value chain of production, so generation, you've got transmission, and then you've got distribution. There are two segments where you can easily get the market activity going: generation and distribution. Transmission is clearly much more difficult in terms of the risks and the income possible. Now, with that in mind, I think that the greatest disservice we currently have is that nation states are still unwilling to tackle in a fundamental way, because we need scale, we need speed, but nation states are not yet ready to really, in a courageous way, embark on those kinds of reforms that you're picking up, Francis. I don't think that it is a matter of time that is needed in order to de-emphasize oil as much as it is the kind of political courage that is necessary to bring the thoughts that are already available. We know these solutions now, and it is how public policy configures itself to move in the direction. And for my own fellow Africans, I fought the battle of development or climate change. I did. I was VP at the World Bank, and I had to fight the battle of making sure that South Africa did not shut down its economy when in 2009, 2010, thereabout, the global financial crisis was affecting most economies. And finding the resources to enable ESCOM to continue to operate was tough. And for the first time, South Africa actually requested for a loan for ESCOM. And it was going to be part coal, predominantly, but wind and solar. I'm sorry I'm taking that much time, because sometimes I hear these conversations and we're not grounding them in the reality of what we're faced with. Do you know that the greatest, the worst part of the conversation was a neither nor position on climate change and development? It's neither nor. It's not neither nor. It's not a zero-sum game conversation. Those who want to deny the impact of climate change on our continent, please stop it. The effects are already there with us.
Exactly.
So don't deny it. Those who want to think that when you discuss the issue of renewable energy, Africa simply just must get it, be careful. Because it also should not be that kind of an easy trade-off. What is the global attention to the kinds of policies, the kinds of financing, the kinds of regulatory systems, and the global norms that will support an Africa policy direction that changes electricity from what it is today to the African into the kind of success we gained in telecommunication sector.
Okay,
Thank you.
Obi, thank you. I suppose the beauty of spaces like the Atlantic Dialogues is because they're safe, and with the sort of people that we attract, it allows a great unburdening. So thank you for that, Obi.
Good morning. I'm Vemba Dizolele with the International Republican Institute in Washington, D.C. My question primarily is Thione, to Thione my address. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for what you do. I heard a couple of things that I think you represent what you said. Africans, especially young Africans, need to start taking charge. But I heard a couple words, a concept you threw out there that I worry about. I don't sense any strong sense of the urgency of now among African leaders, especially in the government and the state. We've been hearing this forever. There's a sense that African thinks they have the time. Time is on their side. we're flexible on time in Africa, but time is not on our side.
Yeah.
So my question to you and people in your space, we have a lot of youth, people who studied overseas who don't have any complex. We already have that. So that's not new. So to you, what are you doing to engage with the policy makers? Because until politics and policy change, nothing is going to happen in that space. Entrepreneurs are not going to rush home. Most of us will not go back because the conditions are just not there. Right. But in the space of energy, Inga, I'm Congolese. Congo owns, at least hold about 50% of hydroelectric potential of Africa. Mm-hmm. The Inga dams are not working. Africans are not doing anything to help that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you. I will be trying my best to be very brief.
Thank you.
Actually, I believe in balancing the two, development and environment. But my point is, say for instance, if you take the Maslow's pyramid, hierarchy of needs, and then if you put Africa in that pyramid, it's the first one, physiological needs, food, water, air, etc. Maybe even four of you, if we put you on the pyramid, you are at different level. So for me, yes, environment doesn't know boundary. It has to be addressed at global level. Even at one point, Nehru Gandhi said that poverty itself is an environmental degradation, meaning that we have to at least tackle the issue with poverty first. So do you think that is appropriate, as it is now, to apply this one standard all across? For me, what I would say is that we need to work first on the poverty. Of course, we have to balance. They are also both the responsibilities of the government. But at the same time, when you talk about adaptation, for me, adaptation, it does not bring enhanced development.
Okay.
Of course, it's important, but that is my point. So I'm supporting the speaker from Senegal.
Thione.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir?
Hum Tran from the US. Very quick question about electric cars. Several panelists are positive about electric cars, electric planes, electric ships, which is great. But that requires a lot of electricity, which in the foreseeable future is more and more reliable on gas-fired generation, which through leaks and venting and flaring produce a lot of methane gas. And methane gas is even more potent in its warming effect than CO2. So what do you recommend we should do to address that risk?
Okay, thank you. And then, sir.
Thank you. Please, would you take your headphones? I would like to express myself in French, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like, pardon, je voudrais réagir à ce que M. Caillé disait sur le bassin atlantique, lorsque vous disiez que les pays du Sud vont être plus chauds. Tous les modèles montrent l'inverse, parce que ce sera l'hémisphère nord qui sera plus chaud, parce que toutes les masses continentales sont situées essentiellement dans l'hémisphère nord et qu'elles réchauffent 5 fois plus vite que les masses océaniques. I am a geochemist of environment. L'année dernière, je suis intervenu pour dire cela, que les terres réchauffaient plus vite. Et cet été, le rapport de l'IPCC est sorti pour indiquer que l'usage des terres est pour 40% du réchauffement climatique. Thank you. I'm sorry to have
thank you. So look, I've negotiated extra time from the organizers, but we have to use it judiciously. I believe I've got my, yes. So please be as succinct as possible. Landry, you have the microphone. Ask the question. Yes.
I am André Signé, a senior fellow here at the Policy Center for the New South and at the Brookings Institution. So first I would like to mention that resources or endowment in natural resources is a blessing and it's not a curse. It is the mismanagement, I think, as I'm not is the mismanagement of natural resources, which is a curse. So it's important to make the distinction. So quality leadership is critical. That's the first one. And the second point is that when we speak about energy transition, we speak also about capability for countries. We speak about equity for resource-rich countries. And we also speak about the cost of energy transition, the financing of energy transition. So to what extent, what do you think should be the top priority for countries, especially resource-rich countries, to, on one hand, seize the opportunity offered by resources while ensuring an effective energy transition toward sustainability and renewable and clean energy? Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Uri Dadouche with the Policy Center of the New South. Just a little bit of concreteness is my question. It's about fossil fuel reduction and it's about adaptation, the two responses. Could you give us examples of countries that are doing these right, okay, each of these, and examples of countries that are not doing it?
Okay, thank you. And we'll close with you so that we give the panelists time to respond as well.
Thank you very much. I'm Joanne Saki. I'm an energy policy analyst from Ghana. My question is this. Is there real motivation to champion the cause of mitigating climate change when countries and investors consider the cost of abandoned or stranded assets over time?
Interesting. Okay, so let's see how we do answering this first round of questions. If they eject us from here, the conversations will continue on the discussion board. If they forget our time, we'll carry on, right? Okay, so yes, go ahead.
Oui, je voudrais réagir à ce que monsieur a dit concernant l'augmentation des températures à travers le monde. Ça augmente plus au nord qu'au sud, enfin, selon les modèles, c'est absolument vrai. Mais il faut aussi ajouter deux choses. La première, c'est que l'Afrique subsaharienne est plus sensible à des changements de température, toute proportion gardée, que le Nord. Et ceci, c'est parce que en Afrique, il y a moins de moyens de contrecarrer, de mettre en place des mesures d'adaptation, parce qu'à plusieurs endroits, l'électricité est simplement pas disponible. Tandis qu'au nord, évidemment, en l'hémisphère nord, l'électricité l'est beaucoup plus. Par ailleurs, je suis d'accord, I'm in accord with what's been said, that is the fight against climate change in the Southern Hemisphere and the fight against poverty go along the same line. And the solution, I think, whichever way we take, or Africa or South America takes to implement, to develop the power sector, the fight against poverty is about electrification. Because then with electricity available, you can develop much more easily a country. Now, let's be careful here. All those nice things about using more power is very good for the environment if the power is produced through renewable energies. But if the power is produced using coal, this doesn't make much sense to electrify the transportation, because you simply will produce more CO2.
Okay. Andreas, it sounded like there were lots of questions that expand your area of expertise. Which country contributes to innovation and decarbonization? Who's sharing and making tech cheaper? Which I think was similar to the question that Uri asked about who's getting it right, who's getting it wrong. If you could deal with those, please.
I think the short answer is that the best country in all of this is Tesla. I think it's wrong to think that countries don't own technologies, but societies can master technologies. And when you look at where does the innovation come from, for solar power, solar panels on roofs, for electricity storage at utility scale, something that your company does as well. A lot of the innovation and a lot of the conceptual thinking of how the system can change comes out of one company and others of its kind. Tesla is just an iconic example that we can give here.
There. I mean, if you look at the example from drugs manufacturers, drugs, the EpiPen, things that are unaffordable versus the generics, which are affordable. So who is, in terms of, yes, who's subsidizing and working for public good versus profit?
I'm coming to that first,
okay.
But the first one is to think, where is the innovation come from? Where does the system change thinking coming from? And it's not governments, but it's entrepreneurs, it is new businesses, it is startups, including in Africa when we look at the rapid deployment of small-scale, standalone power supply systems that are. That's your question on what is driving it, what brings us to scale. It is not a growth of systems, it is replication of little systems. That is bringing the speed into the electrification, the access to modern energy that brings all the benefits. And Africa has done most, and rural India, in first not carbonizing. The question was, which are the countries that are successful in decarbonizing? The highest value was generated by those countries that didn't carbonize in the first place and now don't have to decarbonize, but can leapfrog. And I think that is something that needs to be said. Everybody expects me as a German to say that Germany is great because we did our Energiewende. No, before that, we were the third country to go into coal, and we've burned much more coal than we should have done over the history of the country. So I acknowledge a debt, and actually this is my fathers and grandfathers, so they're all coal miners, and I'm carrying their debt around my neck here with this tie that comes from the coal mining industry. I do that. So that's where it comes from, and I think the answer has been given already. When we electrify the whole of the transport system, it adds, depending on the country and how mobilized it is, between 5 and 15% to the total electricity demand, sorry. In the advanced countries, the electricity systems have enough capacity to power that. And the advantage is when we add the mobility system, electrified mobility system, and connect it to the power grid, we are adding storage. And that means that we can incorporate more easily and more cheaply lots more fluctuating renewable energies. Okay. So we're moving out of the use of gas for producing electricity and then powering our cars, but we're using the car batteries in order to store the electricity that comes from the day when the sun shines and the days when the wind blows, and we can use that energy to drive on other days. So the co-transformation of the electrification of the transport system and the switch to green energy is mutually reinforcing because of the energy dynamics in storage and in the smart grid. That is where the move comes from, and it works at all scales. It works for Germany, it works for Tesla, and it works also in rural Africa, where you can build up not only the standalone systems for households, but you can do it for villages and you can do it for workshops. You can even now buy welding machines that work with direct current. That was considered to be impossible, but you can repair bicycles, you can repair water pumps, you can repair agricultural machinery using direct current electricity generated on the roof of the workshop where that takes place. This is leapfrogging that can happen in the area that you know more about than I do.
Okay, and so Thione, I come to you. We're now on borrowed time, guys, panelists as well. And so the questions I think that you could answer, given your experience, what do you think the top priorities for resource-rich countries should be? And there was a specific question about how people like you, the change makers, engage with policymakers.
Well, that's a question that he asked about policy. That we need to be working on more on policy. Well, I would say to you that I think we have the policies already put together in many of our countries in Africa. I'll go further to say what we need most is how we implement those policies. How we go from, you say what now? That I agree with you, but it's too generalized. It's just to say that it's more on how we can implement some of the good policies, right? We've done so many policies, so many conferences, so many think tanks come through and find out ways to how we can change things in the continent. But in the end, most of those things go under the closets and nobody talk about them. And to implement policies, it takes leaders, politicians. It all comes into leadership and politics. Sound politicians who don't come to power.
So, Thione, I'm going to interrupt you to ask, you are making a difference. You have shown courage.
Right.
Right? You work with Akon. We know some of his songs.
Right.
So you have social capital.
Right.
How are you using that to engage with policymakers?
That's what I'm
to engage with leaders?
actually answering.
Okay, fine. So get to the point then.
If you let me finish, I would have been there already.
Okay, fine. So get there then.
So the point is, to come back to your point, many of us are coming home to do what we can on the ground, but we don't have enough of us who come home and get involved into politics. Until we have the right leaders in place who will come to power to serve their countries, not to serve themselves, we will never change the continent. No one will come from outside to do it for us. So you, yourself, and any of you who are thinking about it's going to be me or somebody else, we need you to come and get involved in politics. If you want things to change, come and take it. No one will give it to you. Power is not given.
Thione.
And it's for the diaspora.
Good people are offering themselves up. Obi offered herself up.
There you go.
Nkosana offered himself up.
That is great.
We don't choose them.
Well, we don't have to choose them, but each one of them, we are the change that we want to see. That's what I'm trying to convey to people.
Okay. And Francis, I believe there were questions around the overstating of electric transportation.
Thank you very much for these very interesting questions and comments from the audience. Yes, electricity and transport, where will the electricity come from? And it's a very important and good and topical question. China is producing a lot of electric cars, but its power mix is dominated by coal with a 75% share. So people say it's very good to produce electric cars. It depends. Sometimes it's not good at all. In the transport sector, in order to reduce the share of oil over time, we need power, electricity, we will need natural gas, we'll need biofuels, we will need hydrogen. And not only electricity, it won't be enough to make the share of oil fall in the sector. I agree with the comments about the importance of the agriculture and the food sector, about the huge hydro potential of Africa, which is totally underexploited. And with the resource curse, it's the mismanagement which is the curse, not the resources themselves. Look at Venezuela. You have all what you do not have to do about energy. Look at Norway. I think that Norway is not very unhappy to have oil and gas in the North Sea, probably. So you have a point. China is doing a lot in terms of the development of renewable energies. They are the leader at a worldwide level for solar energy and wind energy. But their oil consumption is increasing. Their gas consumption is increasing. Their hydro consumption is increasing. They are building a lot of nuclear reactors, and so on and so on. So we have a very complex equations with energy efficiency first, renewables, gas instead of coal in the power generation sector, a carbon price. If carbon is free, why should companies invest in order to reduce their carbon emissions? So it's a key issue. We need a huge effort in research and development applied to the energy and the climate sector. We need carbon capture and storage, and we need adaptation to climate change.
Okay. An alarm went off, which reminds me that we have just 5 minutes to go. And so please take out your phones. Let's see whether we've changed our minds on the question I asked you when we started. And so the question for the, if you could display the question, please. Is it possible to get to net zero? If we could have the question, yes. Can transport and industrial sectors in the Atlantic Basin get to net zero emissions by 2050? Let's see if anything's happened in the room in the hour or so that we've been discussing these issues.
We're at what, 13% we were?
87. They're going to show us the difference. They'll show us the difference.
Ah, we're getting better.
Okay, so congratulations to the panelists. They've made a dent in the opinions in this room. And so this is where we will end. You've been a wonderful audience, and we've had an even more wonderful panel. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and insights. It's been a pleasure moderating your insights. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a coffee break and reconvene at 11:15. Thank you.